Corn snakes are one of, if not the best beginner snake you could possibly get. In fact, this guy was my very first snake almost 3 years ago. Today, I'm going to be giving you guys a complete corn snake care guide so you can be ready to bring one of these amazing snakes into your home. Before we get started, I want to quickly mention that I'm not claiming to be an expert or anything like that. I'm simply going to be sharing what has worked for me and what should work for you guys as well. Also, if this is your first time here, I have a ton of great video ideas planned out for this year, so make sure to hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss out on any of that. But without further ado guys, let's get into the care guide. The first thing I want to talk about is the enclosure size. I like to start off with this because if you don't have the space to house the animal, then everything else is irrelevant. You don't have the space, you simply cannot get this animal. Corn snakes start off pretty small as hatchlings. They can actually be housed in about a 20-gallon enclosure for the first year and a half of their lives, and eventually you will need to upgrade them. As adults, these snakes are not that big. They're more long and slender. They typically average between 3.5 to 5 feet in length, with males being slightly bigger than the females. Of course, there are outliers. Sometimes they can get as big as 6 feet, but this is extremely rare. As far as housing for adults, some people keep them in 40 gallons, which is 3 feet by 1.5 by 1.5. This could work if you have a small female, but for most corn snakes, I would recommend something like a 4 by 2 by 2. These snakes are very active and they'll take advantage of all the room you provide them, so I think a 4 by 2 by 2 should be the minimum. Next, we're going to go over temperature and humidity. Like with all snakes, you'll need to create a thermal gradient so that they can regulate their body temperatures and move to wherever they feel most comfortable. You can create this thermal gradient by having your heating element on one end of the enclosure, thus creating both a warm side and a cooler side. The warm end of the enclosure should be between 82 to 87 degrees. The cooler end should be between 75 and 80 degrees. And as far as night temperature goes, it can drop pretty low, but I wouldn't suggest going any lower than 65 degrees or so. As far as humidity goes, you'll want to keep it between 45 and 65%. Of course, when they are in shed, you can mist it a couple times just to raise it a little bit. This is fine short term, but overall, that's where the average should be, between 45 and 65%. It's extremely important to maintain proper temperature and humidity levels to prevent various kinds of health issues like lethargy, trouble digesting, respiratory infections, issues shedding, etc. That being said, do not cheap out on your humidity and temperature gauges. Don't get the little cheap ones that you see at PetSmart or Petco or even at some reptile stores. Go for a digital thermometer. Personally, I use Govee and that works really well. So yeah, like I said, it's super important that you have the right temperatures dialed in. So your thermometer that you use is going to be super important. Our next category is substrate. If you are new to reptile keeping, substrate refers to the bedding that you'll be using at the bottom of your enclosure. With substrate, you do have a few different options for your corn snake. Number one, you can use something like a Reptibark or a Repti-Chip. This is good if you want to keep them a little bit on the drier end, like the 40s and 50s, because it does not hold humidity well, but it is very aesthetically pleasing. Another option is cocoa husk. This is good if you want to keep them a little bit more on the humid side, like in the high 50s, low 60s. Cocoa husk does not mold very easily and can hold water pretty well. Another option you can use is a sand and soil mix. That's personally what I'm using, just because it does serve kind of the same purpose as cocoa husk in that you can have higher humidity with it because it does absorb and it does not mold very easily when exposed to water, but I just like the aesthetics of it a little bit more. It is important to note that corn snakes do like to burrow, especially when they're babies. So if you see your corn snake burrowing, it's not, a reason to be concerned as long as they're displaying otherwise normal behaviors. So if they're burrowing, but they're still eating, they're still pooping, they're shedding, they're active at night, all that, then it's fine. It's not a concern. There's no reason to freak out. This guy is about 2.5 years old, and every once in a while he'll still burrow. Probably like once a week I'll find him burrowing. So it's not at all a reason to be concerned. Next, we're going to talk about lighting. Like most living things, corn snakes do require a day and night cycle in order to properly function. You're going to want to give them about 10 to 12 hours of light during the day, and of course the rest will be darkness. If you're using something like a heat bulb or something like that, that obviously gives off light, then you don't need to worry about any additional lighting. If your heating element does not provide light, like say you're using a radiant heat panel or a ceramic heat emitter, then you will need to find a way to light the enclosure. There are a few ways you can do this. Most commonly, you can use LED lights like LED strips, or you can provide UVB. Now, while UVB is not 100% required for this species, I do highly recommend it. UVB does help them with being a little bit more active. It does help them with immune health, so that's why I recommend it. And if you do opt in for UVB, try to go for a lower wattage UVB. These guys are crepuscular, so they don't spend a lot of time under direct sunlight. And if you do get a UVB bulb, you'll need to change it out every 6 to 12 months, depending on the brand. Next up, I want to talk about decor and enrichment. This is what's going to make your snake's enclosure feel like home. Of course, you're going to need a water bowl, something for them to drink out of, and you're going to want to clean that water bowl at least once a week and replace it with fresh water. You're also going to want to add places to hide on both the cooler end and the warmer end so your snake can feel nice and secure. You'll also want to add different textures for them to explore to be both mentally and physically stimulated. So things like cork bark, stones, branches, leaf litter, etc. will go a long way. These snakes are also pretty good climbers, and they will take advantage of any vertical opportunities you provide them. So I recommend adding at least a few branches or anything like that for them to be able to climb and explore. It's good for their mental health and of course their physical well-being. It'll really work out their muscles, and they just seem to really enjoy climbing. So I always recommend giving them things to climb. Next, let's talk about diet. Most snakes are rodent eaters, and corn snakes are no exception. Corn snakes are, in general, pretty good eaters. I've had this guy for close to 3 years now, and he's probably only missed like 5 or 6 meals with me. You can go with either mice or rats, both will work fine. Additionally, you can offer them gerbils or quail as a treat every once in a while. You can feed either frozen thawed or live rodents. But in my opinion, frozen thawed is the way to go. There's just too many risks involved when you do feed live, and there's really no good reason to do it, especially for corn snakes that aren't really picky eaters. The size of the feeder item will of course depend on the size of the snake. You'll want to feed them a rodent that is about the same size as the thickest part of their body, or even slightly thicker. The frequency will depend on the snake's age. As babies, up until about the 8-month mark, you want to feed them every 5 to 7 days. Then you can switch to feeding them every 7 to 10 days. And then once they reach adulthood around the 3-year mark, you'll want to switch to feeding them every 10 to 14 days. Lastly, we're going to talk about temperament and handling. And this is where corn snakes really shine as a great beginner reptile. Corn snakes are docile by nature and not at all likely to bite. Even the wild ones that I've caught in the Everglades haven't bitten me. So if you get bit by a corn snake, like, I just can't trust you. Like, that snake was probably onto something. On the off chance that a bite does occur, it really will not do that much damage, especially as compared to something like a python or a boa, or even an arboreal snake like my green tree python. So if you do get bitten, it's not a big deal, but again, it's not at all likely. Additionally, they do not seem to mind at all being handled. In fact, they almost seem to enjoy that extra opportunity to climb and explore different areas. However, excessive handling can stress them out, so I would recommend handling them no more than 3 times per week. Additionally, you want to avoid handling them when your snake is in shed. When a snake sheds, their eyes kind of turn blue, and they're pretty much blind or close to blind at this moment. So it's a very stressful experience, and handling them will just stress them out even more. You don't want to handle them the day of feeding. So if you plan on feeding them at night, don't handle them that same day, just because you don't want to kind of throw them off and then risk them refusing a meal. And lastly, you don't want to handle them for at least 2 to 3 days after they eat. You want to just leave your snake alone so it can absorb the heat and just digest its meal. that's the care guide, everyone. I hope you found it useful and informative. If you guys have any questions or concerns, just make sure you leave them down in the comment section and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you did enjoy the video, please make sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. I would really appreciate it. That's going to do it for today, guys. As always, thanks for watching and enjoy your reptiles.